We welcome you to episode 19 of the second season of the Exit Philosophy podcast. I'm Scott MacArthur, coming to you from beautiful, lovely, and today, sunny Halifax, Nova Scotia. He is Rich Griffin, coming to you from Oakville, Ontario, and I don't know what the weather is because I'm not there. It is Monday, May the 13th, as we sit here and talk to you. The Blue Jays are coming off a series with the Minnesota Twins in which they lost 2 out of 3. They are headed to Baltimore for a mini one-series, 3-game road trip against the Orioles, and then they're back home to take on the Tampa Bay Rays. Griff?
Scotty, but talking about 3-day road trips, I know that you drove from Oakville back to Halifax or suburbs. How was that trip? Was that about 3 days?
Well, when I usually make it 3 days because I like to stop. So, and I typically stop in more or less the same spots, but it depends if there's someone I want to see or a place I want to go or whatever. So I stopped, and I want to get this right, Griff, because you're going to nail me on it as someone who spent a lot of his life in Montreal. Saint-Hyacinthe?
Correct.
Is that it?
Absolument.
Because when I look at it, right, I'm going to be like, Saint Hyacinth. Non, n'est pas. So I stayed at a hotel in Saint Hyacinthe, east of Montreal, on Friday night. And then I did the long-ass haul to Moncton, New Brunswick, for Saturday night. And keep in mind, it's not only a long drive, you also lose the hour when you cross from Quebec into New Brunswick into Atlantic time. And then I made the pretty short drive from Moncton to Halifax, which is about 2.5 hours yesterday. And so I'm back in Halifax. It's a gorgeous day today. Got home. The trees have leaves on them, which was not the case when I left just before Easter weekend. And the vibes are good here, man. The Atlantic Ocean is still just over there. And the sea salt air, I love breathing it in, and I'm getting back into the flow here. So with that in mind, or should I mention this publicly, or have we not locked it in yet? Because you and I talked about this.
No, let's save it till next week.
Okay, we're saving it till next week, but we can't leave people hanging. We have a date in mind that we've got to commit to with our schedules, but we have a date in mind for our first live YouTube post-game show. We wanted to get to this earlier, but as I shared last week, life got pretty serious for me in the first 5-6 weeks of the big league season, seeing a friend through to sadly the end of her life. But we're going to get into some YouTube live post-game shows, and those will be coming soon. So we will confirm next Monday the first debut episode of that.
And we're anticipating, Scotty and I, that by that time, the Blue Jays will be 3, 4, 6 games above 500. So we're looking forward to something good, positive to talk about at that point. Otherwise, it could be a little depressing.
Okay, so we anticipate the Blue Jays being 5 or 6 games over 500 with a series against Baltimore, a series against Tampa Bay.
Tampa Bay is not good.
And then you got the White Sox coming into town.
White Sox are not good.
You're going to Detroit, and then
Detroit has one good pitcher.
Okay, so you've laid all of it out, Griff.
Oh yeah, Pittsburgh.
Because
Pittsburgh.
I didn't hear this from you, so this is not me taking a swipe at you. I would never do that. I'd come at you straight and direct. But I did hear that teams like Kansas City were vulnerable. That this great juggernaut, the Blue Jays, were going to be able to take advantage of teams like Kansas City. And I would listen to this, and I'd be like, hey, did anybody alerted anybody to the fact that the Royals don't suck?
I don't think you heard it here because I was on board for the improvements that the Royals had made, the additions they had made in terms of veteran leadership and veteran pieces, changes in their starting rotation, the fact that Cole Reagans is a damn good pitcher. And Brady Singer has always had the potential to be a pretty good pitcher. And then they added some extra pieces, and they're that's whole AL Central is a revelation in terms of competitiveness and the ability to match up against the AL East, which has always been considered. It's the two divisions out west, the AL West and the NL West, that suck at this point, which is unbelievable. If I was a player, I would want to go play on the West Coast. Of course, if they signed me, that's why they would suck, of course.
Except they haven't signed you and still they suck.
Yeah.
So
they've signed players like me.
Griff, I always thought, because, we worked, Gregor Chisholm, who is now the lead baseball columnist for the Toronto Star, at the time that you and I were both covering the team, you were the lead baseball columnist at the Star, and I was working for TSN, and Gregor, of course, was at MLB.com. And so there was always an MLB.com reporter correspondent in every city. And, you traveled a lot. You still do. And I always think, like, what division would I want to work in if I was an MLB.com correspondent? It's not the American League West, because you have to go to Texas and like the suburbs of Dallas, not Dallas, the suburbs of Dallas, and you have to go to Houston a lot. And Anaheim is not Los Angeles, despite what they want to call themselves. And Oakland is not San Francisco, even though you stay in San Francisco, but it's a bit of an effort to get back to San Francisco. And
I see.
Seattle is awesome. Seattle is awesome. But the National League West, man.
Oh, the NL West by far would be the division.
You're in LA. You're in LA near Pasadena, and you can get to Santa Monica easily. San Francisco, San Diego, Phoenix, Arizona, and Denver, Colorado. Inject that into my veins.
On a professional basis, also, if you're covering games in the Eastern time zone or the Central time zone, your deadline is much earlier. You got time after the game to craft a good story and still go out and get something to eat or drink or whatever your pleasure is. And NL West by far. When I was working for the Expos, the NL West tour, the West Coast, that 3-city, because it was always twice a year. You'd start in San Diego, go to LA, go to San Francisco. Best road trip of the year.
Oh.
Unless there was an earthquake.
Well, yeah, and that happened to you in the 89 World Series. You were there.
Unless there were riots in LA. We were out there in San Diego for the Rodney King riots. And
91, right? 1991.
Yeah, and we had to stay in San Diego for the extra 3 days. They canceled, or they postponed the 3 games at Dodger Stadium and rescheduled them as consecutive doubleheaders on the next trip out. And so we went 3 days by the pool in San Diego, and then flew to San Francisco to play the scheduled series against the Giants. The last day, I think Tom Runnels was managing. I know Tom Runnels was managing, and we went to Jack Murphy Stadium before flying to San Francisco. And I had my suit on. It was a travel day, and they were throwing a football around. So Larry Walker had the football, and I went for a pass. And I jumped in the air, and the ball hit me in the chest and carried me about 15 feet. And I fell in the infield dirt in my suit, went on the flight looking like a hobo. And Bob's your uncle. The guy had a good arm. I don't have to tell you, but Larry Walker had a good arm, whether it was baseball. And I found out football. I might still have that cavity in my chest.
Yeah, well, you were the second best diving shortstop to Gary Templeton of that era of the San Diego Padres, right? I mean, they traded away the wizard by that point, but at least you brought him back for a half a second. Any football game on the field.
Gary Templeton, when he went to the Cardinals, was changed the Cardinals travel schedule. With Whitey Herzog managing, they used to come into Montreal the night before a series. And the first game of the series, they would always get their ass kicked. And Whitey figured out, because it was in Montreal, and when his players landed, they found a place to go late at night, whether it was Chez Paris or anywhere. And so he changed their travel schedule, and Gary Templeton was the ringleader of that group, and they would never travel to Montreal until the morning of the first game, and that became their habit.
Help me, because this is a little before my time. Like I remember Ozzie Smith with the Cardinals and Templeton with the Padres. So I was not a sentient being. Well, I think I was, but I wasn't a baseball sentient being when that trade was made. Would that Cardinals team have also had Keith Hernandez on it?
Yes.
Okay, so Montreal. There are still places you wouldn't want to take a black light that those teams would have been to.
There were some, yeah. It was a different era.
Oh yeah, there's no question. And what a true home field advantage for the Expos too.
Yeah, at least for the first game of the series.
At least for the first game of the series. Although the problem is not the problem for the Expos is you finish the game and then you head out for most of the rest of the night, and suddenly the Expos have a second advantage in the middle game of the series. So let's get to our stuff, because we got a bunch of it. Shout out to you, Griff. You liked what you saw from Alek Manoah in his big league season debut, and you predicted that more good than bad was to come, even though Manoah sort of fell apart in the fourth inning of his season debut start. He was awesome against the Minnesota Twins, and I know he gave up the 3-run bomb in the seventh to end his afternoon. Hey, by the way, a 3-run bomb allowed to Carlos Santana is much less of a problem if, say, I don't know, let me make this up. You've scored 5 or 6 runs yourselves, and then a 6-0 lead becomes 6-3 instead of requiring your starting pitcher to be damn near perfect. But outside of that, and that was at the end of the start, and somebody said, well, why didn't John Schneider pull Alek Manoah? My response would be, for who? Who do you trust down there? Who?
Yeah, besides, Manoah was still dealing. It was, there were a couple of errors behind him by that day's starting third baseman, because, as we agree, they don't really have a starting third baseman. But Ernie Clement was
World Series contender who doesn't have a starting third baseman.
Well, yeah. But in terms of Alek Manoah, the first start that he made, and the numbers weren't good. This start, he was really, really good. And the difference being, and not the difference, but he had a change. He added the changeup as a big part of his arsenal for the second game. I think he threw 1 in the first game, and so when they did the advanced scouting videos, they didn't see the change, and he incorporated it with Alejandro Kirk, who kept calling it, and it worked, and it was a swing and miss pitch for him. Now the question is, before everybody gets too excited about that start from Manoah, now there's new video. So you got game 1 where he got trounced not throwing the pitch. You got game 2 where he threw it a lot. So there's a lot more information out there. And I think a key will be how he handles his next start. But off of the mound is what I based my appraisal that it looked good. It looked better than the numbers showed in his first start. It was just the way he carried himself, was the way he interacted with his teammates. There was a lot of thought at the end of last season from people who have never been in a major league clubhouse that he would be ostracized by teammates. I don't think that was ever going to be a possibility, because these guys are all in it together. They're in the clubhouse together. They're members of the players union, and we're not sure, behind the scenes what was going on in terms of the Players Association and Alek Manoah, but they are all in it together, and it showed in that first start. Spring training, he was a part of it. He was included even when he was on the IL, even when he was making starts in Buffalo. He was included among those going to the bullpen to watch their starting pitcher that day and walk in from the bullpen. And then his body language between innings and during innings, what to me was a great sign and is a great sign moving forward. But we have to see how the stuff plays. And the fact that he was healthy, the fact that his velocity was there, the fact that that he seemed to really be into the games and to be exactly like he was in 2022 when he was dealing.
Yeah. And that, and I understand what you're saying about scouting reports, new video. Griff, this is the life of a big league pitcher, right? If Alek Manoah's stuff plays, he's going to be fine. And we saw the Twins stack their lineup with left-handers, and they've got a bunch of
that was a big factor that he was able to get through that, because we've seen pitchers like Barrios not be able to do it.
Right. And his one of his issues with his slider, as effective as it was in his best days against right-handed hitters, was that it would often sort of land or sweep or slide into the barrel of left-handed bats, and he'd give up the odd dinger, and the OPS against lefties was a little higher. If the stuff plays, it doesn't matter what the video scouting reports show. Most big league hitters, especially veteran ones, have seen Justin Verlander for what? 60, 80 plate appearances at this point over 15 years. I mean, he's been around longer than almost any hitter. So almost every active hitter has seen Verlander, knowing what's coming.
Yeah.
If the stuff plays, that won't matter, and he will be good more often than he is bad.
And one thing I forgot to mention, but from last year to this year, I think last year, the new pitch clock and the new rules affected Alek Manoah as much as anyone, because part of his persona was, and you remember, he would step off the mound, get a throwback, he would rub the new ball up and he would stare at the hitter, and it would piss hitters off. And he would take his time, get back on the mound, be ready to throw. And I think that the shortened pitch clock and watching Chris Bassett, who seems to be thrive and to enjoy working the clock. Manoah, not the same person, but he was trying to be the same person as Chris Bassett. I think that messed him up, and plus a lot of other factors that came into play. But I think he's come to grips with all of that, and he was getting the ball back, going to the top of the hill, not looking in for the sign. That's no longer a thing. Yeah. But he was ready to throw, and he would throw and be animated and get the ball back and repeat. And I don't think he was ready for that last year, and now he is. So we'll see. But, I like your analysis that if your stuff plays, you'll get people out.
Yeah. And we know his stuff plays.
Yep.
When he's on. But he's got to get back to that. So I think that there are building blocks. And the other thing I like about this, Griff, is this isn't the Chicago White Sox. So people can't say, I mean, who plays for Chicago? They suck. They're a minor league team. This is the Minnesota Twins, a playoff team from last year with a bunch of plus left-handed hitters, Manoah's weaker side, and a team that just came off of a 12-game winning streak.
And crushed Gosman.
They're good.
Before, yeah.
They're good. And so, I mean, all signs are pointing up. And I would also say, on the flip side of the coin, the notion of Alek Manoah becoming a regular part of the rotation and having a bounce back season isn't going to mean much to this team if it can't hit. Because unless Alek can step into the Shohei Ohtani role and take care of his own business and go 3 for 4 every night with a couple of bombs, he can't contribute to the runs 4.
But consider this, Scotty, is if you have 5 starting pitchers that you trust, including Manoah at the bottom, and we know all about the other 4 guys, you don't have to be saving your relief core to piggyback on that 5th starter anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
So like in a moment of need in game 3 or 4, before the 5th starter, you can bring out your best reliever, because you don't necessarily worry about having to go to the bullpen in the 3rd or 4th inning of your, like every starter right now most times is going to give you a good 5 to 7 innings. And if you're in the lead, you can use your best guys rather than think down the road and, oh, Alek Manoah is pitching or Yariel's pitching and he only goes 3 or 4 innings. So we better not use so and so, or he can't pitch because it's his 3rd day in a row, that sort of thing. And I think that that's a hidden factor that is going to help the rotation and help the team. I'm not saying that all of a sudden they're going to go on a winning streak and be back in the hunt for the division or a wild card. Well, they'll be back in the, if they play well and they have a starting rotation that's deep, that is that deep. What they do need now is a return to health with the bullpen. And we talked about that before, but I mean, you look at the bullpen and there's too many gaps in what seem to be a pretty deep and resilient pen.
Yeah, and I just look, they're generally a good defensive team, and it's a sensitive time to talk about that because Ernie Clement we're sitting here on Monday, May the 13th, time stamping again, but yesterday's starting third baseman, who generally is reliable defensively, made a couple of errors, including one to extend the inning that resulted in the Carlos Santana 3-run bomb in the top of the 7th that broke the scoreless tie, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Generally, they are a good defensive team. We know that. Pitching, they're supposed to be strong. The rotation, for the most part, has held up, especially at the front end with Barrios and Kikuchi, who's off to a hell of a start, and the timing is beautiful for him because he's an impending free agent at the end of the year. That's held up. The bullpen was not supposed to be a problem, Griff. And it is, alongside the offense, a huge issue right now. And it is still early. And God, I hate saying that. It's one of my least favorite phrases. It is still early in the sense that can still get organized and work itself out, and guys can end up slotting into roles. They need health. They need Chad Green. They need Jimmy Garcia healthy. They need Jordan Romano healthy. I don't know what to make of Eric Swanson right now, but that splitter needs to be something that Kirk or Jansen has to get onto both knees to block, as opposed to starting way up in the zone and then falling into the bat path of left-handed hitters who tend to like the ball down and on the inner half of the plate. That's been happening way too much. And I don't know if it was the near tragic March followed by the injury as he tried to work his way into shape that screwed everything up for him. I understand that it might be, but they've got too many question marks and uncertainties there right now, and that has to get organized because they have to keep leads when they have them late in ball games. They just don't score enough runs.
Yeah, I did not realize at the time how big a loss the injury to Bowden Francis would be, because he's a guy that'll give you 6 outs if you need them early in a game. Is that high leverage? Not necessarily, but it's eating innings in a certain role, which they don't have right now. For the 2 innings that Bowden Francis would give you, they're using Pop and Nate Pearson. They had Brendan Little up. That might work out later in the year, but there was no room for him at this point. And Genesis Cabrera is not doing that great. Tim Meza was struggling early. And I still don't remember if Jordan Romano has had a 1-run lead save or if it's always 3 runs, 2 runs. And so he can have a guy get on base. But I don't see too many clean innings from Jordan Romano. So a bullpen that was once considered a powerful part of this Blue Jays team is suspect until Chad Green comes back, Eric Swanson settles down, Jimmy Garcia continues to excel in whatever role he's used in, and Tim Meza comes back as a guy who can get lefties out reliably and a lot of righties out also.
And so that leads us to where we are right now with this team. Jays are going to Baltimore. It's a mini 1-series road trip. Then they're back home, and they've got Tampa Bay, who neither you nor I like, just the attrition, right? But they're the Rays. And
yeah,
they are.
Yeah.
You can't, like, the point I'm making, Griff, is you can't take a pen and write a sweep
No.
into the
No,
weekend for the
I would say of the next 13 games, and I forget whether I was including the Rays. I think I was starting after the Rays, but they need to go 8-5 or 9-4. So, you're not necessarily writing a sweep in against the Rays, but a team that we're arguing about whether their window of opportunity is closed, they need to take 2 out of 3 playing at home. That's all there is.
right.
And the Rays defense the defensive metrics are down. They're one of the worst teams in MLB, and usually they're great at every fundamental in the book, and they're not.
Yeah.
So you got to take advantage.
You got to take advantage, and that's the key, right? Because my flip side of, well, the Rays are a weaker team than usual this year and the White Sox are horrible. It's like, well, we talk about it as if this elite Blue Jays team has to take advantage of weaker opponents. And I'm like, but the Jays are, I mean, nobody's as bad as the White Sox, but the Jays are Rays-ish in their own ways, right? They can't hit. And they need some guys to get going. So my point more is the assumption that they're just going to thrive. I see it as a double-edged sword, Griff, which is you can do damage against the White Sox. You go 5-1 or 6-0.
Yeah, they have to. They have to go 5-1, I would think, because that's a bad team.
And you need to do that, and you also can't be fooled by it if you do it, because really all of the opponents you're going to have outside of the White, because you're going to be done with the White Sox after that 6-game stretch in like 10 days. All of the opponents you play from then on out are going to be better than Chicago. So you need to use the White Sox to get back to treading water. But you also can't draw conclusions like, oh, we opened up a can of whoop ass at Guaranteed Rate Field. Everything's better now. The only thing guaranteed is the rate.
Well, when I went into John Schneider's office on Friday with the media group, we were talking about the Twins and how well they were playing. And I said, Schneider, you know that on their 10-game win streak, 7 of those were against the White Sox. And he went, well, they're still playing well. And that's the way that you would have to look at it, is that the Jays need to handle the White Sox and continue to play well against other teams. You can't go 4-3. No, you can't go 3-3 in the 6 against the Sox and go, oh, that was okay. We were 500. No, you gotta step on their throat and crush them.
Right.
But then use that to propel yourself into a legitimate hot streak. But you can't just say, okay, well, we'll do it later, because they have to do it now.
Yeah, I mean, it can get late early. You can't make the playoffs in April or May, but you can put yourself in a position, even in an expanded playoff format. And we probably shouldn't call it that anymore, because it's just what it is, which is the current playoff format, and it's not going backward. But in the expanded playoff format, as I go against my own advice, you can make it overly complicated for yourself. And so there is a flip side to this coin, Griff. And I listened to Ken Rosenthal on the Foul Territory podcast with AJ Perzinski and our buddy Eric Kratz. Enjoy their content and often pull it off of YouTube and just get their latest thoughts on the state of the game. I think they go Monday to Friday, 5 days a week in season. And Rosenthal, who is a regular guest on Foul Territory, said that the Blue Jays are a team to watch, that if things don't turn around soon, they conceivably could be a seller leading up to the trade deadline in July. And so, look, the White Sox, it's still going to be May when everything is over with the White Sox. But there are other avenues that this whole trajectory could take. And one of those is that it isn't all that good against Tampa Bay and Chicago White Sox and Detroit Tigers and the White Sox again. And if it isn't, if you are a 500-ish team over that span, or hell forbid, you are under 500, then you are digging yourself a deeper hole. And then you've got to start to think bigger picture about organizational decisions, because you are a year away from Bo and Vladdy's respective free agency. And I know your thoughts on signing your own guys long-term and building around them. I get that. But if this thing takes an ugly pivot, then you're thinking bigger picture. Because if you are even going to sell, and I'm not only talking about Bo or Vlad, I'm talking about even the guys who are impending free agents like the Kikuchis and the Jimmy Garcias of the world. If you are going to sell, those trades would need to be made by someone or some people with stake and future in this organization, and that's not the general manager. And so you would have to think about whether it's a Shapiro clickbait combo going into July here and moving off of the Atkins diet. Because I'm telling you, arteries are getting clogged. And it's so who's making the decisions ultimately? This could get ugly in the next 2.5 weeks, Griff. There's also that possibility.
Well, you know my feelings on whether they will tear this down. And I agree with you on pending free agents. Danny Jansen, include him in that. Although we've seen Alejandro Kirk try to catch consecutive days or 3 days or 5 days a week, and that's not a possibility. I think it's affected his long-term career, Kirk's, because he'll never be able to sell himself as a free agent as an everyday catcher. He's going to have to be a backup, you know? And to me, because of all the investment that they've made in facility, and we've discussed this many times, I think that the only people they can trade and get away with it among the fan base is guys that are going to be free agents. You can't trade a guy who's got 3 years left or 2 years left, or in Vlad and Bo's case, 1 year left, because you have inventory and it's expensive inventory, and you invested a lot of money, and you told Rogers ownership that this was why you needed to do it, so you could get more revenue from fewer people. And to do that, you need to have a competitive team on the field. So I don't think rebuild is in their vocabulary at this point. But I agree with you. If it does come down to that, that the manager shouldn't be the one to go, the president shouldn't be the one to go, but the GM is the most likely, because he's replaceable in this group, and there might be more of an ability to talk to your players about long-term if they know who's going to be there as the GM long-term.
Yeah. And James Click is in the organization.
That's the person about whom we're speaking. Yes.
Right. And I get goofy with my nicknames, and I'm going on about clickbait and ending the Atkins diet and all that stuff. But it's James Click, who is the World Series winning general manager of the Houston Astros a couple of seasons ago, and had a falling out with the owner of the Astros, Jim Crane. And we're not privy to the entirety of the details of that, but I don't think anybody has ever described Jim Crane as not insane. So I'm sure there are stories to go with that, but I just think you got to start looking bigger picture here, Griff, and if it doesn't go well in the next 2 weeks, like the window here, I look at this as a sort of Toronto sports fan generalist. The same companies that own these sports teams are the same companies that own but certainly some of the major players in the media that cover these teams. And the media industry is obviously very volatile right now. It's in a significant transition. Some of the traditional ways of making money are subsiding as streaming and online options come into play. The old models just aren't working anymore. And I look at some of this and I'm like, man, everything. And I think it's what pisses a lot of people off. I don't think people care about what happens to a reporter or a talk show host or anything like that. But this is what pisses people off is typically in your professional career, whatever it is that you do in whatever industry that you're in, you are held to account for the results that you produce individually. And you don't get a 9 or a 10-year leash making millions of dollars like a Brendan Shanahan with the Toronto Maple Leafs or a Ross Atkins with the Toronto Blue Jays to produce results that don't match, theoretically, the requirements. And they're never going to come out and be honest and say, well, a beer costs $19 at a Maple Leafs game, or a bottle of spring water that really just got pulled out of the Humber River costs $9. And I mean, they're never going to be outward and say, well, look at the revenue we're generating by selling hot dogs and beer and merchandise and blah, 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 blah. So in fact, Brendan Shanahan is doing his job because no, we're here to win. We care. Just win, baby, like Keith Pelly more or less said. And so what you end up with is you've got regular, like, blue collar fans or people who just make regular livings who really can't afford to go to games anymore as these stadiums price them out, and they watch on TV and they're like, how come these millionaires get so long to just be goddamn mediocre? If I was like this, I would have been out on my ass 5 years ago.
Well, I describe it as, for instance, the Blue Jays players are Hannibal's troops heading through the Alps, and the Shields are MLB.com, which is run by MLB. It's Sportsnet, all the people at Sportsnet who have a huge interest in making their product on television and radio and seem 100% great. And then you have the Blue Jays' own social media, and the fans, when things are not going well, are throwing the rocks from the Alps, and the Shields are blocking any damage to the troops, which are most important because they're going to invade Rome. So that's my analysis.
Yeah, I just,
and
I just think if this were Boston,
Mark Shapiro is Hannibal, not Lecter, but Hannibal.
I was about to ask, are we having an Anthony Hopkins moment here, or not? Clarice, who's Clarice? If he's who's Clarice? But you understand, you understand. If this were Boston, this wouldn't be tolerated.
Well, because Boston, New York,
Chaim Bloom. The Bloom came off that rose, and it wasn't even his fault, and he got railroaded.
The Boston media, the New York Yankee media, and the New York Mets media are the same as the fans. You can't cover any of those teams and be accepted by the fan base unless you were one of them. And that's not the same anywhere else. They're the biggest small markets in North America, in North American sports, because I think by and large, the media want the team to do well. And when they're not doing well, they throw things at the people making the decisions, which doesn't happen here.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I notice, Griff, sometimes too, and like I said, I do not frequent a lot of social media. I'm occasionally on Facebook, and I don't know, either with or against my better judgment, join some of those fan groups just to see what people are saying. And, a lot of it is fire this person, or Mattingly needs to go, or John Schneider. And we can't just keep this rinse repeat cycle of playing the way we're playing. And I'm like, you do know John Schneider's less than 2 years on the job, right? So to fire him would be the definition of rinse repeat. You can't just keep scapegoating the guy in the uniform in the dugout. And that's why I argued last week that if the manager is ultimately to go, it's because the replacement general manager determines that he wants his own manager, or she or they want their own their own manager in uniform in dugout. We're done firing managers and hitting coaches here. It's the general manager that has to come next. The other point, and it's a bad team that you cheer for when you start getting lectured by the true diehards who get mad at other fans on sites, or the way it used to be, who used to call radio shows 30 years ago, back when talk radio was the driving force for immediate reaction, who say, real fans watch, win or lose. You can, like, there's no room for criticism. And that to me is always a sign that you cheer for a bad team, is when Joe Q fan comes out with his friggin' sledgehammer and says, nobody's allowed to criticize this. You're not a real fan if you don't. And or if you do criticize it. And I'm like, okay, we're starting to reach some of my tenets for bad team here with the fan base. Where they're arguing with each other.
This coming from a Cubs fan, lifelong.
Yeah, but those people, you get 8,000 people showing. What's the old Lee Elia meltdown in the 80s there? 8,000 people who don't have jobs.
Yeah, don't have afternoon. They're all day games.
It's just like,
there were no lights. They were all day games. So how did these people go? They don't have jobs, Lee Elia said.
Just amazing. Like, just a way to butter up the rest of the fan base. Who cares? But you see what I'm saying, Griff? It's just like,
But the Schneider situation, for instance, or just an analogy to that, is like you said, he's only been there a year and a half. It's like if you have a child who's in the 4th grade and you're pissed off and you're going to take him out of school because he can't split the atom yet. It's part of a learning process. John Schneider is learning things all the time, and he's sitting next to Don Mattingly, and people want Don Mattingly to take over. Wait a sec. He's been sitting with him for a year and a half. Now you want this guy to take over?
Well, and it's also, but like John, and look, I am not here to defend John Schneider. I'm also not here to pile on. But you want a couple of ways to make your young, in terms of experience, and I do want to call John Schneider young because he and I are about the same age, and I refuse to believe that I'm old, even though rolling out of bed in the morning has become a negotiable thing. What's going to hurt? And how long am I going to take to have to limp it off?
No, you're young. Trust me, you're young.
I want to be. But but I'm thinking to myself, you want to hamstring a manager? Have the bullpen be shit. Okay, box checked. And I'm not hammering on Ernie Clement, because there's a place for Ernie Clement on the Blue Jays or any big league team as a bench guy. How about another way to hamstring a manager is have crucial positions on the field not filled by starting players. The Jays have a rotating cast at third base. Third base.
Yeah,
and Clement has an untimely bad defensive game, and it contributes to. Now, could a Matt Chapman have had an untimely bad defensive game? Sure, anybody can. That happens. I get it, but the point is that the regulars who man these positions is the reason they do that. And so, if you're giving John Schneider just a bunch of chips, here, go play these. Go play these and hope that you take the pot. It's also negotiable whether that's going to happen. And I just, roster construction, a lack of offense, a surprisingly bad bullpen, it's all conspiring right now, Griff. And some of this was foreseen. The bullpen part was not. But one thing we do know about bullpens is that they can be like individual relievers. 1 year's on, 1 year's off. These guys get used a lot, right? And that can have carryover effect. So you can't really necessarily count on certain things with relief pitchers. It just so the melting pot of problems for this team right now have conspired to result in the disappointing record that they have. And I had them over 500. I still think they'll get there. But the more they continue to drop series,
86 wins, but you can manage, and this, I'm speaking from experience, it's not on the same level by any means, but you can manage a perfect game and lose. If your closer gives up a bloop hit and walks a guy and then gives up a two-run scoring double, and you lose, you manage perfectly up to that point. And you're managing human beings. You're not managing stocks, and you're not managing anything predictable. And so when you have a lineup, and they have the deepest bench in baseball because they have 6 people on the bench and everybody else has 4. They just have to play 2 of their bench players as starters every game. So it is the deepest bench in terms of numbers. But when you have Bo disappointing, George Springer, Varsho struggling again, Kevin Biggio is something's happened. He's not hitting.
But Griff,
Kirk, when you have Vogel back on the bench, whatever. And Justin Turner's sort of on a slide that nobody notices, but people are still pointing at Vlad and Bo as the main reason. But there's a lot of company in terms of not producing.
right? But Vlad and Bo have to be the consistently good offensive players on this team, and Bo has been bad, like not just mediocre, but bad so far. That hurts. On Springer, you and I have been on this. I mean, he's aging, right?
Yeah.
Dalton Varsho, when he got hot, we talked about, can Dalton Varsho settle in to he doesn't have to have a 1200 OPS every 2 weeks. I mean, that would make him the league MVP if he had a 1200 OPS every 2 weeks, because he carried it over 26 weeks of a season and end up being the most valuable player in baseball. So that's not going to happen. But can he find a consistent?
Yeah, earlier in the season, when he was batting 6, 7 in the order and doing very well, we're talking Dalton Varsho, John Schneider said, I'm not going to move him because he's doing well there. He's comfortable. And then necessity became the mother of moving him to the 2-hole where he hasn't done anything.
Right.
And there's just something going on. Maybe pitchers approach him differently because he's at the top of the order. Maybe there's something going on in his head in terms of putting more pressure on himself. But Schneider was right the first time. He needs to move back down. You need to, and we've talked about it, you need to, now it's necessity again, put Davis Schneider, top of the order. Vlad is starting to hit, so he can be either 2 or 3. And I know that a lot of people think your best hitter should be in the 2-hole because he comes up more often. But 2 or 3, he's fine. I mean, you talk about exit velocity. I almost said exit philosophy, but exit velocity.
It is difficult. Yeah.
They've played 40 games, and Vlad is now top 3 in Major League Baseball with Giancarlo Stanton and that guy Ohtani with the Dodgers in terms of the exit velocity numbers on Baseball Savant. And he's had 100 balls hit at 100+ miles an hour over 40 games. And he's 25. Oh, no, he's had 50 in 40 games. So he's 25 for 50. He's batting 500. So exit velocity obviously means something more than just, he hit the ball hard, but he's making outs. That's a 500 batting average over 50 at bats in 40 games. So he's coming out of it. He's good at the top of the order. You have to leave Turner up there. You have to move Springer down to the 6 or 7, maybe Jansen 5, because he's really swinging the bat well for Danny Jansen, and he should DH more, and you should have Vogelbach not in the dugout. So there's a lot of things they could do with the current. They don't need to make trades or to improve, to get the offense cooking, but they need 2 or 3 guys to step it up. The correct batting order, they need that. And Vlad is stepping up. You know, we talked about other teams that the Jays were playing, and their number 1 hitter seemed to be always coming up with in a big situation and coming through. And Vlad has been doing that lately, but he just doesn't have as many opportunities with big situations because of the surrounding cast.
Yeah. And on Biggio, right? I mean, there's a pattern Cavan has, which is there's a 4 to 6 week span, once, maybe twice a season. So it can be large chunks where it looks like he's never stepped into a batter's box in his life. And it has cost him significant playing time in May. What is also likely is that, and it will be in a limited number of plate appearances, he's not going to get into that 600+ range. He never does. But for what he is used for, we will, on October the 1st, look at his statistics, and he will be in that 340 on base range.
Yeah.
Right? However it is that he's used. He is in a funk right now where it looks, Griff, like he's never played baseball in his life. And he goes into those. And it's probably why he's never going to be a true everyday player. And
Right.
he doesn't have to be, but he's tagged with Bo and Vlad as the sons of big leaguers, 2 out of the 3 sons of Hall of Famers. They came up together through the minor leagues, won championships at the minor league levels. John Schneider managed them at Double-A. Let's all strum the violin and sing love songs. We're well past that now. These guys are established as who they are as big leaguers, and this is who Cavan is. It's going to happen every now and then.
Yeah, Cavan's strengths are seeing a lot of pitches, but the outcome is not what you're always looking for. But he does see a lot of pitches, and he can play right field when Springer's either hurt, and he plays a really nice right field, and he plays a really nice second base. So, I mean, he's a useful player, but as you pointed out so astutely, I think that if Bo and Vlad were not here, that Cavan would have been moved a long time ago to another team and would not be regarded in that same breath with those other 2 players.
You think the link, just the sons of Hall of Famers that came up all together.
They've been in those.
They're not doing that to appease Vlad and Bo. They've
been in the same stories since 2018. Sons of major leaguers in the Blue Jays organization. Here they come. They reach in 2019. They're always included together, but their talent levels haven't developed together.
Yeah. Significant couple of weeks coming up here. I just Griff, if they were 10 games, or even 10 games is too much, but if they were even 4 games over 500 right now, I don't think we'd be talking like this. But the one thing that is pretty true, unless you win a horrifically bad division, is that you don't make the playoffs under 500.
No.
You can't win a wild card spot under 500.
I think last year, even in the NL with the Diamondbacks, 84 was an aberration. I don't think that's going to happen again. I think people settle in. It'll be 87, 88 for the last wild card. And the Jays right now, even the most optimistic, that's on the periphery of what they are capable of this year. And for them to do it, they got to start with this stretch of games. They got to take care of business with the Chicago White Sox. And, Pittsburgh's coming in. Pittsburgh's been struggling, although they've got that kid coming in who's throwing 102
Paul Skeens,
40 times a game.
Yeah.
So, but the Jays handle guys like that, don't they?
Oh yeah, as long as they don't have a complimentary off-speed pitch.
Oh damn! Yeah, but
you mean Paul Skeens and everybody else isn't Kyle Farnsworth? Here, I'm just going to throw this through a barn door, see if you can hit it, but I have nothing else to offer. Oh, and it's also straight and doesn't move. So yeah, most pitchers aren't like that.
Yeah. Farnsworth had a constant roid rage on, so
yeah,
had that.
Well, just ask Paul Wilson about Kyle Farnsworth. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, Cubs Reds a little more than 20 years ago, Paul Wilson, a pitcher, was in the batter's box. Pitchers used to hit in the National League, and didn't like Kyle Farnsworth throwing at him, and made a scene of it. And kind of like Robin Ventura with Nolan Ryan, didn't come out on the winning end of that. If Bill Goldberg, this was after Bill Goldberg, maybe it was Kyle Farnsworth who copied Bill Goldberg's spear, and that was what happened there. We're coming up on an hour, so we're nothing without a Griff's conspiracy theory. So let's head out the door with a Griff's conspiracy theory. And Rich, this is your reaction to Daniel Vogelbach, because people also want to know, what's Daniel Vogelbach still doing on the team? This is your explanation in a Griff's conspiracy theory world. And when I say conspiracy theory, unlike most conspiracy theories, I believe that there are occasional truths to yours.
Wow.
So there's a tie in your mind to Daniel Vogelbach still being on the Blue Jays and Danny Jansen's impending free agency. So you talk and I'll get some Kool-Aid. Fire away.
Yeah, Dan Schulman was on Jeff Blair's show earlier in the week saying that there was a 45-day deadline, that if Daniel Vogelbach was still on the Blue Jays roster after 45 days of the season, that his 1.5 million would be guaranteed, would lock in, and he'd be paid for the rest of the season. Now, everyone who's been watching games knows that Daniel Vogelbach is not an integral part of this lineup, and you could bring Spencer Horwitz in or anybody to do that role and hit 103. But my theory is that the agency that represents Daniel Vogelbach, IES, was that the one?
ISE. Yeah.
ISE. They also represent Danny Jansen. And therefore, the Blue Jays negotiation with Danny Jansen would be on a more upbeat level if the Blue Jays have guaranteed Daniel Vogelbach the rest of the year. And 1.5 million in this day and age in baseball is not much for that to happen, for them to curry favor with the agency and make the negotiations with Danny Jansen sing, because I know they would like him back. And we talked about maybe a 3-year deal for a reasonable amount of money.
Off the air, we talked about I threw out 3 and about 50, 3 and 50.
Yeah. So if that's going to happen, and they're now more friendly and looked upon more favorably because Daniel Vogelbach's contract has been guaranteed, it's not much of an investment in goodwill for Ross Atkins and Mark Shapiro to make in order to get a number one catcher back on board for the next 3 seasons. And that's a conspiracy theory, and I'm sticking to it. Otherwise, why would Daniel Vogelbach still be here?
I just struggle to believe that anything other than a contract in term and dollar that is suitable to both team and player would result in Danny Jansen either coming or going.
He likes it.
Right? It's not like Danny Jansen's going to give up a year of term because his agency feels like, well, you were nice to our guy, Daniel Vogelbach.
It all comes down to the player, but the agency recommends and goes with what the player thinks. So if the player wants to stay, if Danny Jansen wants to stay and be a part of this organization, which he's been since he was 17 years old, then he works with his agency, and they work it out. So I'm not saying that the agency would influence Danny Jansen, but the Blue Jays could influence the agency, and Danny Jansen wants to be here.
Yeah. Well, and I in many ways, he's the heart and soul of the team, and he's been healthy since coming off of the IL, and let's hope, and I'm knocking on literal wood because this is a wood table that this microphone is sitting on right now. I'm hoping that stays true through the rest of the season, and that Danny Jansen stays a Blue Jay for a number of years, because I mean, he's obviously a very good catcher. He's got a lot of pop in his bat, and is in many ways the soul and heartbeat of a group that needs a soul and a heartbeat.
And he's unique. Now. He's unique in his craft because he doesn't go down on one knee and let balls go back to the backstop because he's trying to frame the bottom of the zone.
This public service announcement has been brought to you by Richard Griffin and Buck Martinez. Probably collaborated on that opinion.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
But yeah, I am with you. I'm an old school guy that way. YouTube.com/exit philosophy is where you can watch us if you like looking at our faces and our backgrounds. And I tried to get some white in the background here because I'm back in Halifax now. It has just been a complete war for me to get the lighting right in this place. And I feel like maybe I've landed on something here today, Griff. I have not been sort of darkened out. You can see me. I've got the ring light. I've got some white in the background, which I think helps the laptop camera. I feel like I was in a bit of a groove today.
And you've got a tugboat coming out of the left side of your head there. It's beautiful.
Yeah, so this is a fully furnished spot that I'm in. So some of the decorations weren't put there by me, but this is a maritime part of the world, hence the nickname of the Maritimes. I kind of like it as I look back.
Yeah, the backdrop's beautiful. It frames you perfectly.
YouTube.com/exit philosophy. You can get the video and obviously complimentary audio portions of the Exit Philosophy podcast there. And Griff and I do plan on doing live YouTube post-game shows. We may have an announcement tied to the first date for that next week, but we've got to figure out our schedules, and we're hoping that first one will come very soon, like within the next few weeks. So stay tuned for that. Griffsthepitch.com. Griffsthepitch.com is Griff's website. Throw him a subscription. If you throw a little bit of money, you get the entirety of the content. You get multiple weekly columns. You get MLB power rankings each week. You get exclusive conversations with current and former Blue Jays and former Montreal Expos. Those are fascinating. There's a deep archive now. Griff's been at this for the better part of a couple of years. And you get the Exit Philosophy podcast at griffsthepitch.com. So head on over there. And other than that, Griff, unless you've got something to say, we'll wrap this baby up and be back next Monday.
Perfect, Scotty. Thank you for hosting, and thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.